You're listening to the Sass podcast. I'm your host, Kristie Overstreet, also known as Sass. I identify as a woman, a wife, and a mother. That should tell you a lot already. And over the last few years, I've learned the value of talk therapy. I have seen how my inner work not only enhances my own well-being, but also my marriage, my parenting, my relationships. And in fact, you wouldn't be hearing this right now if it weren't for the work I've done. My mission is to debunk the misconceptions and stigmas around what therapy is and who it's for. Let's normalize working on our mental health and seeking help when needed. We've all heard of self-care, self-help, and self-love, but do you often wonder how to actually make it all happen? I do. You'll hear strategy-based conversations with professionals, as well as inspiring and validating stories from women who are just like you and me. Think of this podcast as the weekly therapy sessions you didn't know you needed, with a dash of sass, a lot of vulnerability, and me, relentlessly asking, but how?
Hello, hello. All right, let's get into it. I'm joined today by Dr. Juliana Hauser. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist and a counselor with a PhD in counseling education. For 20 years, she's worked with clients to help them manage relationships, sexuality, confidence, infertility, and more. Her work has been featured in Oprah, The Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Women's Health, The Discovery Channel, Martha Stewart, Shape, and others. Her flagship courses include Revealed, Uncovering Your Sexual Story, Revealed International Facilitation Certification, Be Your Own Sexpert, and The Wanting. Don't worry, she tells us all about them on the show. She's also a writer and thought leader, and she speaks to audiences around the world. Oh my God, okay, so I know I am relieved to have a little bit of a break from body image. Just personally need to sort of switch gears every now and then. And this is such an amazing conversation around sexuality. And what I love about it is that it is far from the usual and what is typically thought of as a conversation around sexuality. Dr. Juliana talks about sexuality as the essence of our being. Don't worry, I ask her to deep dive that one. We discuss sexual agency and really agency in general, what it means, how we tune into it, and just all the things around agency and decision making. We also talk about sexuality and parenting. Ugh, it's a thing, we all have to deal with it, and so much more. I want to also take a moment to mention that if you haven't seen them yet, I've uploaded some video content highlight reels from the last 4 episodes, including this one, up onto my YouTube channel. So please go check that out. The link is in the show notes. And that's all I got. Here's Dr. Juliana.
Hey, Dr. Juliana, nice to meet you. So good to see you.
So good to be here.
Yeah, I am just the listeners are maybe going to see this lovely background because I am maybe going to get my act together to show some video, and this background is inspiring me to do that. It's like just so gorgeous and fun and gets me right in the mood.
Thank you. I wanted something in my office that when I walk in, it made me smile. And when I saw this advertised, I was like, oh, that's it. That's what I'm gonna do. Yeah.
Yeah. And for anyone who can't see it, it is red lip wallpaper. Is that?
Yeah. It looks like you like kiss the wall.
Kiss the wall. Yeah. Super cute. Okay. All right. Well, so let's get into it. Why did you get into this field? Why become a therapist?
So I actually started off as a kindergarten teacher, and I knew I wanted to work with kids, and I loved the connections. And I thought that was through teaching. But once I got into it, I realized that where my heart was I was always wanting to ask them how they were doing. And I was really promoting knowing their family and having family meetings. I would go and eat dinner at their homes. And that was the most joyful part of that job for me. And my aunt was a psychology professor at Boston College, and we were having several conversations that year. And she's like, Juliana, I think you're meant to be a psychologist, a therapist. And it never occurred to me. So I started looking into it. And ended up moving and went to grad school, got in Auburn. And I remember the first class that I had, I looked around, I was like, these are my people. They talk like me, they look at the world like me, and it was absolutely life altering. I had no idea that how I looked at the world, what was important to me was a profession and was something that other people could talk to. It was just they're the easiest classes I ever had, the most interesting, and obviously the most challenging too.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So not necessarily related to you. I'm just curious, thinking about, teachers now. I feel like in the last few years, there have been a lot of conversation around teachers, teaching, the whole thing with COVID and just in general. Um, Feeling like you want to ask them how they're doing. Is that what am I trying to say? Like I'm trying to get at I'm trying to choose my words carefully. I'm trying to get at, like, why do you think some teachers gravitate to that and some don't? Or do you? Do you think
Yeah,
there's
I've seen
always a
that.
desire or what? I'm just curious.
I mean, my experience with when I was a teacher, and I've been a teacher at multiple levels at this point, and then just with my kids' experiences, is that in general they generally care about the well-being of others. It's
Mm,
just how what they're attending to is different. I've certainly met some teachers that it was like, I'm just going to stick to this subject and I'm not getting into any of the personal things. And I would have guessed that's personality, maybe
yeah.
a little bit of training, but personality too, or having experiences where the lines have been blurred and they don't want to go back to that experience
Ah,
anymore.
fair. Okay. I asked mainly because, I think now, if I had to guess, I would say that teachers are just entirely overworked
Yes.
and underpaid and not enough resources. And so, it's hard. I would imagine it's difficult enough just getting through a lesson plan, let alone asking how someone is. On the
Yes.
flip side, as a parent, how comforting to know that I'm sending my kid to a school where the teacher is going to say, "How are you?"
Yes.
My
Mhm.
goodness.
And for some kids, no matter what age they are, that may be the only person that asks.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And then so moving to when you kind of switch gears and feeling like you've found your people,
Mhm.
the perspective that you came into those classes with and then related to, where did that perspective come for you?
Like, why was that a natural inclination of mine?
Okay.
In some ways, I really think it's a lot of how my mom looks at the world and how she would speak to me that it became a natural part. I think it was also part of my personality.
Hmm.
And then I just had this natural curiosity. I really do look at the world through relationships and through connections. It's my go-to with everything.
Hmm.
And I was so interested in how that worked. I'm also really interested in how people change, how behavior changes.
Okay.
And so that's a big focus of my work too. And it's certainly like my therapeutic style is to focus on change and kind of
Mm,
short-term solutions to that too. And I thought it was just interesting to think of the different theories of
mm,
why the different theories of how people have problems, how people solve problems, and how people interact with each other.
mhm,
And a theme that I saw too, especially early into my training, was that people can live a long time in pain, but
mm.
they can't live a long time without purpose and connection. And when I saw
Interesting.
so many people that all you need is one friend or one organization or something, a pet, your religion, something that you feel connected to, that then you feel like you have a place on this earth, that your life matters. And when I started getting to that phrasing, I used to have a sign in my office before I changed to the lips was "Your story matters,"
Mm,
and I think that's a lot of what my job is now too, is for people to know that their story matters.
yeah.
I remember this. I ran a counseling center at a university in Virginia, and I had this one client who was really quirky and a little bit socially awkward, and we'd been working together about a year. And he said, "This 1 hour that I have with you this every week is the one hour that I know someone's going to know I'm alive, and
Oh
someone knows
my
I'm
gosh.
dead." I know, and it's just it's heartbreaking,
Yeah.
clearly, but also it feels like such an honor
Mm,
to help someone know that they matter, and that's the joy too. That for me with my clients, I genuinely really care about who they are and their story and how they're doing, and that lets me know I'm in the right place, doing the right thing. It doesn't feel like work.
yeah. So in genuinely caring about the clients and I don't know, it feels like how do you manage the boundaries though, right? Because there still has to be a boundary. And so what is it for you and how do you cope with kind of knowing maybe that you won't speak to that kid for another week and wondering what's going on all week long?
Yes, yeah, there's so many boundaries that you have to learn as a therapist if you're going to be in your career long term, that it was touched on. And so I got my master's and my doctorate. So I had 5 years of training,
Mhm.
and we would talk about it. We talk about self-care, we talk about boundary work, but I don't know if you can really understand it until you're really doing it. And for me, some of the boundaries that I had to work on was not fretting over my client, like worrying about them, as you said, like from session to session.
Mhm.
Others was just learning how to shake off the emotions. Like, one of the things that I think that makes me a good therapist is that I am truly empathic. I get into the emotion and into that, to their story, into where they are. And then the next hour it's somebody else's, and it's
Mm.
often an emotional roller coaster throughout the day. One client will be in a great place and it'll be a joyful, fun session. Another, it'll be horrible and they're in a deep
Mm.
depression. Another, we're going through trauma. And I needed to learn, and I still have a bit of a problem with this, is making sure that I stop my sessions with enough time that I can regroup myself. I can let
Mm.
go, I can shake off the feeling, regroup my energy and move into the next, because that part of it is that I have to really protect my energy
Mhm.
and know where I stop, and the client begins. And I have to do that at the end of the day too. And
Mm.
my office is in my home.
Mm.
So I do everything virtual, and I've been doing it virtual for many, many years, well before COVID. And so my daughter will often wait for me by the door. She will hear it when I'm done and close off. And so I don't even have like a little bit of time between that to go from
Buffer.
picking off those 6 hours of
Wow.
clients to going into mom mode. And I've learned to have that boundary too, so that I can have a clear ending, and transition to something else, whether it's for myself or for my family. Or I do other things too. I do lots of media stuff. So I switch roles.
Mm.
Another thing that I had to do is, especially because my area of expertise is sexuality, I had to I had to really do work for quite some time of, not everyone is an abuser, not everyone
Mm.
cheats, and not everyone is miserable in their relationships. And that certainly isn't what I see. I have lots of people that come to me in good places in their life and they're just wanting different skills to get better. But at the beginning, that's what it felt like as a new therapist. It felt like, gosh, like, just, I felt suspicious of everybody,
Mm.
distrusting of other people. And I didn't realize how that was going to bleed over into my own worldview and my own experiences,
Wow.
because I had a self selected population that I was being exposed to all day.
Yeah.
And when you get insulated like that, you can forget that that isn't the whole world, that isn't everybody.
Okay.
But that
So
was a
when
boundary I had to learn.
so when you say you became suspicious of people, you mean outside of the therapy room?
Yes, in my life,
Oh, wow.
I realized that I had a heightened level of suspicion that I didn't have before I came into this career and was
Interesting.
working full time.
Yeah. Because I actually had written down that I was gonna ask you, like, how did your training impact your personal relationships? And I think you just answered
Yeah,
it.
but training felt different. Like, training was, I wanted everyone to do the tests that I was learning. I wanted to, like, tell them all the theories I was learning, and especially when I got turned into the specific aspect of sexuality, I wanted to talk about it to everybody. So that affected it, and people, in my personal relationships, especially for maybe the first 10 years of my career, it was like. I didn't think that I was being a therapist in my relationships. I
Mm.
thought I was just being Juliana. But I got that feedback from friends, or from my family, and certainly from romantic relationships. And so I had to learn I had to make sure I didn't use any of the lingo, because some of it was just my natural inclination. I wouldn't have become a therapist if that wasn't how I looked at the world.
Right.
But I didn't realize how much I was just throwing in language or throwing in aspects of my work. And I needed to learn to have consent, that that I just didn't need to offer up my analysis of everything before we went into it. And now that's not a problem, but it was something, because I felt so good about it. And it was my natural way of being. And I could tell it made a difference in people's lives. So I wanted to share that with others, but not everyone wants it.
Right.
So I try not to do it as much.
It's funny. I tend to, I'm not a therapist, but I tend to like play that role in my friend groups in a sense. And my husband's always like, you should just go get your degree. And I was like, no, because then I wouldn't be able to fulfill that role. Then it would be weird. Then then they would feel icky about it. But now they just are like, oh, this is just Kristie being Kristie.
It's true. That is true. And once you get a title associated with it, it's different.
Yeah.
Same with like parties. I learned also, like I was meeting people, if I went to like a party, or if people asked me, even like this happened a month ago, the grocery store, someone asked me, the checker asked what I did as a profession. And I have to decide, do I have the energy to get into this now or not? Because I either, especially if I say sex therapy, it becomes a party trick very quickly. And some days I just don't want to be that. I want to just be Juliana and not ask the questions, or not have people just dump all their things on you when you're just wanting to have, a Pinot Grigio.
So just curious, if you decide to not share what you do you have like a go-to fib that you tell?
I will say, sometimes I'll say therapist, and they assume I'm a physical therapist, and I don't correct it.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. And sometimes I just will just slide through and not really answer it and go to something else. But other times, though, I feel like I'm going to be a teacher today. I'm going to say in the Kroger line, I'm a sex therapist, and just see what they do with that.
Yeah. Boom.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So why this specialty in sexuality?
I found that it seemed at first coincidental that my internships when I was getting my master's it was like a sexual abuse home for those who were sexually abused and sexual abusers. I worked at an AIDS outreach program, and my clients ended up often talking about sex and sexuality. And so I thought it was coincidental. But I realized it wasn't. I was actually asking more about sex and sexuality than my colleagues were, and didn't realize that was an interest of mine and a comfort that I had, because I didn't grow up in an environment where sex and sexuality was a comfortable or even an open conversation, but it was something I was always interested in. I was curious about it, and I didn't understand why it was so taboo, but it was. And I had quite a few experiences of that being said to me, what a taboo topic this is. But I in those spaces, I wanted to know, and I knew, especially when I was working at a home for girls who were sexual abusers and sexually abused, I knew it was a huge part of what they were going through, and I knew it's one of the few things we all have in common. So why can't we talk about it? I knew that we weren't being properly educated, and it was causing so many problems. So I had like a gap. I actually got out of therapy for a bit and went and acted for a while. And in my acting time period, which was really interesting, because it actually wasn't a huge diversion, because it's both a study of human behavior. You just use your observations differently. And sex came up in my studies as an actor also. And I had this one instance where my acting coach asked us, I was in an acting class, and she asked, what would be the worst scene that you could do, like the scariest scene for you to have to ad lib? And I was one of the first people to answer. There was about 20 of us. And I said, oh, having to seduce somebody. And then the next group, the next person was like, murder my mother. And then everyone was just kind of looking at me like raping somebody. And as soon as they would answer these horrible things, they would look at me like, why would you think that a seduction scene was the worst scene ever? And so then she had me do an impromptu seduction scene. I was horrible at it. And then she had someone who we knew would be good at it do it right after me. And it was super shaming. And she didn't mean it to be shaming, but it was an example. And she looked at me and she's like, fix that. I don't know what's going on with you in your sexuality, but you need to fix that because there's an inauthenticity to you if you don't have this connection with who you are as a sexual being. And no one had ever talked to me like that, meaning like no one had ever put that kind of connection. And I don't even think she knew what she had said to me, but it turned something on in me in like, you're right.
Yeah.
And so I started diving into it. And when I dove into it, I realized there was this treasure trove of self-development that I could know about myself. And that's really where the phrase began for me, which is I feel that sexuality is the final frontier of self-development. So if you want to know who you are, know who you are as a sexual being, we're just taught that sexuality is sex and not this holistic representation of who we are. I believe is the essence of who we are. So when I started seeing that it wasn't just sex acts, which is great and wonderful and a huge part of your sexuality, that it wasn't just that I could learn who I was. I wanted other people to know that. And I started working with the concept of agency within sexuality. And when I was getting my doctorate at William & Mary, I started asking these questions. And I only work with women identified folks in the beginning. And I heard story after story. It just happened to me, and not even sexual assault, but just, I never put myself in these positions. I never used my voice. I never asserted myself. I never even asked myself, do I want this? And it felt like they were so hungry to learn more about who they were as a sexual being and to have the skills to be more competent in their sexual lives and to just define it on their own terms. I wanted to help people do that. And then when I invited other genders into the course and started talking to everyone about it, I realized women were hungry, men were desperate. And non-binary and transgender had, especially back then, that was 20 years ago, had little space at all to speak about their sexuality. Thank goodness that's changed, but not the hungry and desperate part. That's still the case. And so I thought, coupled with my comfort level that really kind of came out of nowhere. I don't know why I'm so comfortable with sex and sexuality. I just am. I still feel like I'm pretty unlikely as a person. When you look at me, I don't think you look at someone that looks like they're going to be comfortable with it, which is kind of crazy too. Like, why is there a look to it? It should be accessible. We all have it. So why can't anybody be comfortable and talking about this and helping others? And so I realized that it was just a niche that I could help people in a different way. And when I went virtual early in, I realized I could really help a whole lot more people. And because there's a stigma, and there still is a stigma attached to going to see a therapist, a lot less than now than it was when I started this profession, but add sex onto that. And there's even more of a stigma of going into an office. So when I went virtual, people had a lot more privacy and a lot more access to me in area. If they didn't have somebody in their hometown, they could do it remotely with me.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So let's get into what you said about, sexuality being a person's essence. What does that mean? And what does holistic sexuality mean?
Yeah.
I
So
can't even say it without being uncomfortable. Did you hear that? I was like,
and that's because sexuality
say the word. Never.
Well, and it's also, it is taboo. It's not polite in so many circumstances for us to be able to talk about it. So to me, I think that sexuality is the essence of who we are, because I think it's like, and I use this word sparingly because the word purity has such a negative connotation with sexuality, but I think it's just the purest expression of us. I think this is if for those who can't see, like I put my hands on my chest, clasp over, and then I open it like this. So I open it up, and that's what I think our sexuality is. I think it's like a soul. It's our soul connecting with someone else's soul.
Wow.
And I believe that, like, for me, my belief system is the kind of why we're here on earth is to connect. And as I said before, like I really have seen that if I can help somebody get one true authentic connection, again, with a pet, with a person, with their partner, with a parent, a child, a community, their religion, then they feel grounded and tethered in this world. And you can't feel a true connection unless you know who you are. And you have to show up to any of these connections in an authentic way, or you don't feel like someone really knows who you are, and you don't feel truly seen, heard, and valued. And for me, the essence, you have to know the essence of who you are. You have to know the core of you. And I often have people say their essence in like six characteristics. kind of, you can usually boil down yourself into that, like the purest part of you, the most consistent part of you. And those are the characteristics that you want people to value in you. Those are the characteristics that you want people to see in you. Why saying that sexuality is the essence of who you are seems such a like a record scratcher thing? It's just because we're taught that sexuality is sex or who you're having sex with. And so I was like, no, it's not. No, it's not. What sex I have and who I'm having sex with does not define the essence of me. But that's just because we haven't been taught holistic sexuality. And a man in 1981, Dennis Daly Bailey, he came up with this thing called the circles of sexuality. I find them outdated. They're wonderful, and it was cutting edge when it came out in 81, but now I found it to be quite dated. So I came up with my own, and there's 10 pillars of it. It is sensuality, health and reproduction, desire, pleasure, identity, sexualization, relationship and intimacy, love and connection, and behaviors and practices, and then agencies, rooted in agency. And so when you look at all of those parts of holistic sexuality, all of those aspects end up being an expression of you. So we all have senses. We're all sensual. Again, when we put sensuality in the context of sexuality, we think sensuality only means like we're just wearing a flowy skirt. And,
I know. I was about to do the same thing.
Which can be a part of it, but really sensuality means our 5 senses. And so when you again start broadening your view and your relationship with the word sexuality, then you can realize, I'm just talking about how do your senses interact in the world, and how much do you attune to the senses in your world. So sensuality is one of those. Also pleasure is another. So pleasure, again, we can talk about self-pleasure, masturbation, or we can talk about the pleasure that we experience in our life. And when I started asking people about their relationship with pleasure, it's so often our society has this deprivation of pleasure, like work your tail off and be miserable and have like the most wonderful answer of how you're doing is I'm so busy. And then you go on vacation and you indulge. And so this deprivation and indulgent pleasure cycle that so many of us are on often happens in our sexual life too. And it changes when I start talking about it. So again, like I often talk about inside of sexual connection and then outside of sexual connection when I'm going through the pillars of holistic sexuality. And when you start realizing like, yeah, that is me. How do I show pleasure in my world? How much do I invite pleasure into my world? That's not overtly sexual in how we've been defined it. But it is a part of who we are. And so we just go through all of them in that way. And we do it, you can call it inside and outside the bedroom, but obviously sexuality isn't always there.
Right.
At the end, you realize that, and I have this course called Revealed that takes you through holistic sexuality. You realize that it is the discovery of you. And I have found of all those pillars, sensuality and pleasure are the 2 of them that if you are in touch with your senses, and if you're in touch with pleasure, even like a momentary place of bliss, you are in a mindful present place. And when you're in a mindful present place, then you're in touch with your essence. You're in touch with your essence. That's when you're making choices that are aligned with your purpose and intention. When you're in touch with your essence, that's when you're connecting soul to soul with people. And it doesn't mean that when I say soul to soul, sometimes that is like those rich discussions that it feels transcendent. But sometimes it also just means someone that experiences you is comfortable in your own skin. Someone that you are showing up with the truth of who you are. And that is, to me, the essence of us. I just add sexuality as a part of it because it is truly, we have bodies and we have sexuality, and that's pretty much all we have in common. And it should be the language that we're speaking. It's just unfortunate that we've been told the wrong things about what sexuality is.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So 2 things come to mind. One, if someone comes to you as a sex therapist, are their minds just like absolutely blown by everything else that you tie into it? Like, do people come to you knowing that this isn't going to be just a conversation about what's happening in the bedroom?
I mean, some people, if they follow me, they know that that's
Okay.
my mindset. But there are some people that just this word of mouth, and they've heard or they've seen me media, and media doesn't always let me get into like the deeper evolved way I think about it. I try.
Mm-hmm.
um but yeah, and I make it clear. So
Mm-hmm.
yes, I can do sex tips, and I've done that for many years, but if you really want my magic, if you want to know like what my skill set really is and how I can help change things, I want to teach you this.
Okay.
And it's again, it's how I know that I'm supposed to be doing this, even when there's been times I wish it wasn't my calling to do this, because you have to have a really thick skin to be in this world. I get judged a lot. um I will, I know I said sometimes I don't tell everybody what I do because it opens up a can of worms sometimes. But there's other times in my life that I would tell people sitting in a bus stop with me. Do you want to hear about sexuality? I'll tell you about it. I want to change. I want you to hear this. It feels like it just changes. And when I get to see how, when I have the chance to tell people a different view of looking at this, and it changes things for them, it's such a contagious feeling. I want everyone to feel that way, and I see it healing people of what the shame and all the hardness and the trauma, even the smaller traumas that we have in our lives, and are the differentness. Like no one thinks they have the right sexuality, and oftentimes because my work is rooted in agency, it means that I want you to have your own sexuality defined with what's right for you, not defined by anyone, not defined by me, not defined by your partner, not defined by your parents or society or our government. That there's such a freeing of being able to say, who are you, and who do you want to be, and why is that who you want to be, and have that rooted in purpose and intention. When you get to have that space, it changes everything, and you want to have that agency in all areas of your life. And sexuality is a hard place to have agency. Sexuality is a hard place to define it on your own terms, because everyone has an opinion.
Yeah.
Always right and wrong.
Okay. So I was going to ask you, what are the roadblocks to agency? And I think if there's anything more about sort of the context of agency, of what it is, before you answer that, feel free. I feel like you said a lot there, but if you are, and in the best way, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that in a bad way. I just want to make sure like you feel like your definition of agency is represented. And then kind of talk about the challenges around that.
Yeah, thank you. So agencies, I was saying before, like I when I started asking, again, it was in in the context of sexuality, and I started hearing phrasing like, where was I? And before I knew it, it was just happening. And these weren't stories of assault. These were stories of people saying like, it wasn't this horrible experience, but I never checked in with myself. I just went along with it.
Yeah.
And that didn't feel good to me. I don't want that. I want to actively go into it. And so I started asking about choice, and I started asking about decision making. And I realized, again, especially because I just started with women to begin with, that women in particular were not shown how to make decisions in their life, that they were made for them, that parents would do, like a good parent, a loving parent made decisions for you to protect you. And that was certainly the case with my parents, my mom especially. Her way of showing love was deciding things for me. And telling me how things were going to be or not be. And she didn't mean it in an unloving way. It felt, for a teenager, like I had a very controlling mother who was very, very strict. And one of the quick consequences of her loving me in that way was I didn't know how to make decisions for myself. And it wasn't just, yes, we all make decisions. So I'll ask people like, do you make decisions? And do you actively make decisions? And it's like, yes, of course I do, like all day.
Right.
But I broke it down, and after years of talking to people and adding other genders into the discussion, I realized that there's 5 steps of agency and decision making and self-autonomy and self-determination. They sound very simple, so I'll warn you that you're like, that did not take 20 years of research to come with it, but it does. It's very complex. So the first thing is that there's a decision to be made. There's a lot of times that we don't even realize there's a decision to be made, or we think we know the decision to be made, but actually that's not the actual decision that needs to be made in that moment. So you have to be very aware Do I want to do this? Do I not? Is this what I want? Is this, what's happening here? That's the first part. The second part, the skill of it, is that you have to feel like you can make a good decision, that you have good information, that you feel confident in yourself, and that you can make a decision that's aligned with your purpose and intention within life. That is this, do I have the skill set? Do I have the confidence? Do I have the information to really to make something that's going to serve me? The third is you actually actively make the decision. So this is like, a lot of people make decisions by committee. They'll call 3 or 4 people. Like, what do you think? What do we do? And you want to disperse the responsibility of that decision, or you don't make a decision. You make the decision to not make a decision, and you just slide in to whatever everyone else is doing or whatever's happening, or you wait so long, you've removed a lot of choices, and so, oh well, that's just what happens. And a lot of people do that because it's been really painful when you make a decision and it goes awry. And that leads us to the next step, which is the fourth skill, is that you live with the intended and unintended consequences of your decisions. That's often where people come to me, that something has happened to them, that their agency has been taken from them, or they haven't activated their agency and things have gone awry in their life. Now, sometimes unintended consequences are good. Sometimes things go a lot better than you think they're going to, and that's great. Sometimes they don't. People who are planners, who they've thought of 7 different ways that things could happen after this decision, but the 8th thing is what happens. It really throws you, and we're not really taught how to live in that space. So I've learned that if you have agency, you have to know that after you make that decision, you don't know what's going to happen. And you then go to the 5th skill, which is you make meaning of those intended and unintended consequences. And the meaning making often falls into one of 2 categories. One is that you feel resilient. You're like, yes, I made a good decision. The world is good. I am good. I know how to do this. Great. I'm going to feel confident to make the next decision. Or it didn't go well, but oh well, I learned a lesson. Now I know better. And now I'm going to change this and shift this. You have a resiliency to you. Or you go in the category of protection. The world is awful. I can't stand men. Women are not to be trusted. The world is to be trusted. I'm not going to make decisions anymore. Those kinds of things. So those are the 5 steps of agency. And then there's 4 things that you have to put kind of throughout. The first is, and I've talked about this a lot, is you have to know who you are. So you can't make a decision that is going to be aligned with your purpose and intention if you don't know what your purpose and intention are and who you are. And that's an ongoing process, which is where my work with sexuality comes into play, because that's where I like to teach people, who they are through sexuality. The other thing is that you have to have a tolerance for ambiguity. And when I learned this, I was so angry. I was like, I've spent a lifetime learning certainty. I spent a lifetime protecting myself and feeling like safety is certainty. If I know what to expect, if I can plan for everything, if I can do the worst case scenario, then I'm not going to be thrown, because I've already figured out how I'm going to do it. And when I learned, and there's theories that back this, that the most evolved characteristics of people is a tolerance for ambiguity. If you think of Buddha, you think of some of the higher thought leaders, you have to have this kind of place of Zen, not on your life. I mean, that's just not my personality.
Yeah.
But I started focusing on that. And I realized when I had that moment of, I'm going to be okay, no matter what, I'll figure it out. Then that is what true safety was. That is a whole lot more of a safe place than feeling like you have to orchestrate everything to be certain for you. And I didn't love that shift at first, but when I made that shift, it changed everything in my life. And I felt like I had to teach everybody that. So you have to have this tolerance for ambiguity as a part of agency. You also have to have multiple perspectives. You have to see that your decisions have ripple effects in the world, in your relationships and other things, and in your own continuum of timeline. And you don't make those multiple perspectives override your decisions or your intuition on things, but you have to take them into account. You can't just be in a vacuum. And to me, this is where agency differs from empowerment. Empowerment is a big campaign, and I believe in empowerment for sure, but empowerment is individual and agency is relational. So you know that you are in in a puzzle piece with everybody else, and when you're activating your agency. And the last thing is that you have to know your intersections. So agency is a birthright. Everyone has the right to agency in their life, self-determination in their life, but not everyone has the same access to it.
Mm.
So I look at it this, like, some of us have like this narrow pathway to agency, some of us have this, but once you get through it, the world is open to you. But we have intersections of race and intersections of gender and sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, that affect how much birth you have in order to get into agency. So all those things together, all is my concept of what agency is.
Okay, there's nothing simple about that. So you can stop saying that if you want, because
Yeah.
like I understand what you mean. Like the words themselves don't
Yes.
sound complicated, but it is truly complex. And like step one could take years.
Oh, it does.
Yeah. So okay.
Yeah.
I want to go back for a second.
Mhm.
Just because I think that if my listeners who relate to me often are going to really relate to what you've said a few times now about I just went along with it.
Mhm.
And I think that I'm now I'm now thinking back on my own experiences. One in particular that I have wondered, then this was like in college, like years ago, like where it sticks out as a moment of like, did I consent to that? Like, I'm not sure. Um, but like, I don't know. It's gray, like it's fuzzy. And so when you just say I just went along with it, like that actually feels more right than I was assaulted or anything else because I don't know really that I don't it's complicated. Like it's
It is
really
complicated.
complicated.
It is, and it's complicated in the moment, and it's complicated in reflection too, because
Yes.
we change, and we change our view of things that happen too, and so we go back and we're trying to like kind of make sense of it. But what doesn't change is that at this, even at the smallest level of that twinge of like, something wasn't right with that. Something, I know the difference of when I'm actively yesing and enthusiastically consenting to something and when I'm not.
Yeah.
And I find that process, especially like when you're talking about what you are, there's a grieving that comes along with that. Like it's a like I didn't like, where is that, also like where was I? Where
Mm.
was I at? And that could be in a sexual content or not. It can be completely out of sexual content too. Like of like why did I say yes to that job? Like why I didn't even want that. I just wanted a job. Or why when that family member spoke to me like that, or said this to me, why did I just take that or say that? Or conversely, why did I react so strongly to it? Because
Mm.
agency is not reactivity. Agency has a grounding to it. When you are in agency, there's a peacefulness. That doesn't mean that you feel great. Sometimes activating your agency is hard and terrible. You end relationships, or you have to say hard things to people that you know that they may not respond well to it. But there's a piece to it. Where there isn't a piece is the going along with it. There's just this dissonance that happens inside of you. And what feels difficult is when you have that knowing that like, do I want to be doing this? If that's even conscious at the time, we have a reflection afterwards, and it feels confusing.
Mhm.
What could I have done differently, and what would that have felt like? And for me, a lot of times when we're talking in the sexual context, there's like the people pleasing that happens, or the like, I just didn't want it to be awkward, or like once you say the no, or you're like, I don't know if I want to be doing this, or like, let's just kind of stop. I'm not into this anymore. Then we're not taught, what do you do after that?
Yeah.
After the no, after the activating your agency, after finding your voice, how do you get out of it with all any of those kinds of things?
Or how do we get
And
out of it and not care that they think I'm terrible and horrible?
it's
Yeah.
that's right. That's right. How do we say that? And how do we do it in a way that isn't hugely reactive too? How do we just like, I I think I'm done with
Yeah.
this. I think I don't want to do this anymore. I love the consent movement, but I wish we were talking also about the after effect of consent
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. And I,
Yeah,
yeah, I think for me, the just go along with it, like that was like
a whole semester. like that was a phase of, and I don't mean to minimize it by saying phase, but it was definitely a period of time that started and ended with pretty finite dates attached to it. Um, that I just felt like I'm going along with this. And if I really think about it, I know that I was searching for something, right? Like I was searching for that connection. I was searching for acceptance. I was searching for validation and sort of attention, really. But and I think too what was confusing is I would never have said that I was an insecure person,
Mhm.
but I totally was. And I in that sense, and I think that um I think that at the time there was a lot of justification in my head of like either of this is what we do in college. We explore and we experiment. And I am, you know, brave enough to explore sexuality. But really, I was miserable. It felt horrible. And I wasn't going into the experiences self-assured and feeling like I know what I want out of this situation. I was going into the experiences hoping for a certain outcome, not communicating that outcome, and just like praying that it would work, like crossing my fingers, and it obviously never did. And I think so many I don't know about the younger generations, but I think I mean
Mhm.
all of my girlfriends in college, like we all sat around saying the same thing. So I know I'm not like the only one who experienced it that way, but it's confusing. And I think that as the part with agency is that hmm, it's tricky in that the
Mhm.
agency colliding with youth, colliding with sexuality, like I almost feel like the feeling that I have inside is like slow down, like slow down. Like we need more time before we're like incorporating our body and our actual in the bedroom sexuality with agency. Like we need more time. Like that's how it just feels to me. Or maybe I'm just saying like I needed more time. Really, I guess that's what it is.
Well, you know what? You've just described something so beautifully, and thank you for sharing your journey in that. Not everyone is willing to share their own
Mm,
stuff with it, so I honor and witness that for you. Um, it's what you've said is exactly what I'm talking about in this, and I think the part that you're speaking of about the time frame and the maturity factor is
maturity. Yes,
that
thank
piece
you.
of you have to know yourself. You have
Yeah.
to know yourself and at that fate. Although we're always knowing who we are, we're always finding new places. But particularly in that time frame, our motives, like you said too, like what you wanted out
Yeah.
of it, and you weren't communicating it. That part comes with practice too, and as we grow and as we have these experiences, that sometimes I'm not sure you can grow unless you've had those experiences. It's like kind of like the chicken
Yeah.
and the egg in this
Yeah.
too. But also times there's a lot at stake that's happening, and we have underdeveloped brains that are trying to figure all this very complex thing out, figuring out who we are, figuring out what our motives are, figuring out how to make meaning of what's just happened, alongside somebody else who doesn't
Right.
have the developed brain, doesn't know who they are, who has their own motives, then add any mood altering substance to it, and we've got a whole other mix
Hot
of stuff
mess.
with it. Yes,
Yeah.
hot mess, but also it's and then sprinkle in
Hmm.
society, and every era has their own thing. But you're right, like your age also was this like it's we are given this pressure, especially women identified folks, to be very sexual, and that's empowerment. Like I'm going to go for it, and you can't
Right.
stop me. And embracing those words that previously were negative, and now we're going to have it as our own. And I don't inherently have a problem with that. And I know we have to have the pendulum swings of things as we grow as a society, but the complexity after that message is difficult to unwind
Hmm.
individually. And it's not like when we're having these one night stands or these connections with people, after a frat party, that we get to talk about this, and we can debrief with one another, which is part of the meaning making process. You debrief with your
Right.
friends, And so we have to just make assumptions of what the other person
Right.
is thinking. And again, like, I'm not saying that those are terrible, horrible things. I think there actually is a place for that in our development, and then we can learn and understand ourselves through those moments. But I do think we do shy away from saying, but there is still some harm that's
Yeah.
done, and there is still parts of it that people are saying they're very happy doing it, like, woo, but privately there is a bit of trauma or sadness, and shame that comes along with it, that then we don't know what to
Yeah.
do with
I'm
also.
thinking of being in, I think, in middle school, early high school, when and this is no knock, not that you'll ever hear this, but when Christina Aguilera's Dirty album came out, and like there's a song where she's like, talking about how basically men do what they want and it's great, and women do the same thing and they're called a slut. And I remember like having no business knowing what these songs really meant, but like chanting them. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
and I I just was reminded of that, of this time where the pop culture icons, I often talk about it in the sense that there was this obsession with thinness, and but there was also this obsession, now that I'm really thinking about it, of female sexuality, but like you said, not actually having the full conversation. It was like, here we are in low-rise jeans and a bra for a shirt, and we're singing about how we're not sluts anymore because we have a lot of sex. Like, it's like there's a lot more to that story. Yeah,
There-
yeah.
and again, inherently it doesn't mean that having a lot of sex is bad or
No,
harmful to you. I don't think that, but we have to understand, it doesn't just start and end
no.
there. And conversely, I have a lot of people that I work with who didn't have sex at all, who were in the purity
Mm,
culture, or no one would have sex with them, and so they didn't have those experiences, and it was kind of virginity not by choice. That there's and I'll say again, no one thinks they had the right sexuality. No one's like, I had the best sexual journey. I was perfect and healthy 100% of the
yeah,
time, and I'm a model of sexuality. No, nobody says that. I mean, I can give you example after example of different nuances. Like, if I'd only done this, well, here's a person who did that, and this is how they feel about it. It's just, we are taught there's a right and a wrong, and you are never right. That is the headline of sexuality in our culture, and that's a mistake, and it's a
yeah,
problem. And that's why the debriefing and the complexity and the finishing conversations of how we make meaning of it, and how we have agency, and how we look at agency in our life makes a difference. And to me, agency is healing retroactively, and it's protective moving
yeah,
forward. And agency, when I see people activating their agency, it causes problems, honestly, at first in their lives, because you're changing your behavior and how you're doing it in the
mhm,
world. That often doesn't serve everyone in
right,
your life. Just like when you learn boundaries, often people don't
mhm,
like it because this lack of boundaries served them. But you don't want to go back. Once you know agency, you can't unknow it, and you want people who respect your agency. And that's also in your sexuality, whether you are partnered for life, or having many, many
yeah,
partners. You want to have people who have their own agency and respect your agency, and that you can co-create all of this
yeah,
together.
yep, mhm. Okay, all right. So the thing that is coming to mind, and I'm certain this is a can of worms, so condense it, condense it how you will in the next few minutes here. But thinking about all of that and naturally relating it to myself,
Mhm.
I very much identify with like the good girl role. Like, I was just always a good kid, always a good girl, always did what I was told to do, all the things, achieved success, like got it done. And I was very aware that like I didn't have sex until college, and I was with a boyfriend, and I loved him, he loved me. Like, it was very, actually my first was like a very pleasant experience, and was super consensual and the whole thing, and it was wonderful. And like so much so that I called my mom the next day and was like, "Mom, I had
That's
sex."
great.
Which is great, right? But what I wonder
Mhm.
is, in such a great way, sex was put on this pedestal of like, I hate to use these words, but it's like what my first experience was everything that I was told it should be. And I'm grateful for that. What I'm trying to get at is that it felt like this thing up here. And if you can't see me, I'm just like moving my hands around. And then as soon as like that floodgate was open, it was like, oh, okay, it's a whole new world. And I guess what I'm saying is, like, I think about this with food a lot with my kids. Like, okay, like if there's a package of Oreos and I never let them eat Oreos, and the first day they have Oreos, it's like they want 45 million Oreos. Like, I'm wondering what your thoughts are as far as parenting and sex and sexuality, as far as it not being like this thing that you should never do until you do it. And then when you do it, it's like, I don't know. Like, do you get what I'm saying? It just feels like, yeah.
And you're right. It's a whole
Yeah,
episode
I know,
too.
okay.
Just think about, but I'll say this, that what you just said is the reason why anyone who is a parent needs to do their own work in their sexuality, because it is a generational either sin that moves forward that we are teaching our kids, or it is the least we are how in the world can we raise sexually competent beings if we are not ourselves, and if we don't know who we are as sexual beings ourselves? So that's the first thing I would say to that. And yeah, I mean, again, like believing that every person, every family gets to have their own agency and gets to define that on themselves. I don't put my personal beliefs onto other families of how things should be done or not done. But what I do think is that you make a very good point that sexuality, I've seen a lot of harm that comes from religions or families that make it something that it is absolutely horrible if you do anything sexual outside of what is sanctioned. That is where I see across the board damage that's done. And because we have a natural draw towards being sexual. We have footage of babies in utero touching their penises and touching themselves. There's a natural thing that we're doing. And so if we make that a shameful, horrible thing, that is, you cannot do it unless it's under these guidelines that I'm telling you. And yet we know there's a natural draw to do it other than that, then that conversation is not going to serve your child. But what you can do is, in my view, the best way is to invite them into this, to say it's a complex thing. This is our family values. This is what I would like for you. And I know there's going to be plenty of people who don't think that don't think that you should give any autonomy to your kids on that. But what I have found is when you give kids information, when you give it in a non-reactive way, and you arm them with information, and that you trust them to make good decisions, that you think that they can make good decisions. That's my number one parenting tip to everyone, no matter what the topic is tell your kids you trust them, show them that you trust them, let them make decisions. Let them make decisions that have nothing to do with sex, so that when they make decisions within sexuality, they already know how to make decisions. They have activated their agency outside of sexuality. They know how to make it. They know there's a decision to be made. They make a decision actively, and they live with the consequences of those decisions. Let them have those consequences. You do that and put it inside of sexuality, and they're going to be such better armed, whether they decide to not make their sexual debut until they're 30, or they do it younger than you would want them to. And it's complicated. And here I am, somebody who's, considered an expert within the sexuality world. And with my two kids, there were times I was like, I have no idea what to do. I have no idea what to say. And I look at my client like, so what do we do? What do I say to this one? And I'm in this world, and I have a high level of comfort. And even like when I made the decision to really get active with the words, I have an 8-year-old daughter, teaching her anatomy. I couldn't believe my internal reaction to teaching her the word clitoris. I know better professionally that that's just another word, and I want her learning it, and I tell everybody about it. But when I heard my sweet little innocent 8-year-old cute little voice say clitoris, it twinged me a bit. So if I have that, and I quote know better, then you also just have to be have to be kind and compassionate with
Mhm.
yourself. As a parent, you weren't given good sex education either. You weren't given proper sex education. You have just been stumbling your own way through it. And just see what you've learned and try to do
Yeah.
better for the next
Yeah.
generation.
Yeah.
That's my
That's funny about your daughter. I've heard this before where, you want to teach them just the body parts, right? Because that's what they are, they're body parts. And my daughter, I'll never forget the look on my husband's face when I'm like bathing the kids and he comes home and my daughter's like, "Look, Daddy, that's his penis." And he was like, "Excuse me?" I'm like, "We have to
yes.
teach them the words." But you're right, because you know what? Honestly, I had to Google some words because I didn't even know
Mhm.
what they were called. Um, and but going back to the bigger point, and I think just for me, I think what's what's going to be very interesting to see how I do this is because I wouldn't trade the way my first happened for the world. And so it's like you don't want to, oh, it's such a fine
Mhm.
line between, "Ooh, do it this way," versus this is not something that you should feel is out of reach. And, I don't know. Anyway, all right.
And that, because there's some theories that how you have your sexual debut, I don't say virginity, I say sexual debut, how you have your sexual debut is sets the foundation for your sexual life. And I feel really
Oh,
reticent to that, especially for those who lost, who had their sexual debut not by
right.
choice. But also it can set it that just because you had this beautiful, and I'm so grateful that you had this beautiful sexual debut, it doesn't mean every other sexual experience is going to be that
No, it
wonderful.
wasn't. I can tell you it wasn't.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that can be a shock
Yeah.
too. And then if you're not taught that there's different ways to experience sexual connection, that some are transcendent and like you've lost time. It's such great
Mm,
sex. And other times it's horrible and you're just like, this is the worst thing ever. Or how to navigate when there's sexual problems that happen with your
yeah.
partner. And we're not given those complexities either. But I do love hearing the stories where it is fully with purpose and intention that somebody has decided to sexual connect with
Yeah.
somebody.
It
I'm
was
glad you
very
had that.
sweet. I won't lie. It was very sweet. It's very like it was like, "Oh, this is like a Gilmore Girls episode." Like. All right. Well, I think I'm gonna have to have you on again because I didn't get to the whole good men thing, and
Oh,
raising a
yes.
son,
Oh,
like, this is just a super important and interesting topic to me, but we've already really jam-packed this. So, why don't you just tell us for a minute a little bit about your programs and where we can learn more about you?
great. So on all social media platforms, I'm Dr. Juliana Hauser, one N and then Hauser. So TikTok and Instagram, Facebook, all the things, and then my website. I have a newsletter that I do just twice a month. I don't spam people a lot, but that's where I put a lot. I do a lot of my writing
Okay.
there. I do reviews of books and movies that are related to my topics, and I tell more about my stories. I used to put all my stories on all social media platforms, and I've changed that. So it's in my newsletter, and you can sign up for my newsletter on my website, which is dr-juliana.com. And programs wise, I have like my biggest program is called Revealed, and that's what teaches holistic
Okay.
sexuality. And I teach it, and then I have facilitators in 8 countries that
Oh,
teach it. And next year, it'll probably be in 11 countries on the globe, which is really exciting. It's in other languages, and it is really accessible. It's for all genders and all sexual orientations. It's been my life's work. It's called Revealed. And then I work with couples. I do something called a sex plan. We have like financial planners, we have nutrition planners, but we don't have a sex plan.
hmm,
And so I help couples come up with their sex plan for their life and their relationship. And gosh, I do so many things. There's the main, of course, I have a course too that I do for people who are healers, people who are like
mm.
therapists, counselors, social workers. I run a support group for them that they get to be the non-expert and they get to be
Oh,
held.
wow.
And I do that weekly
Very
too.
cool. Okay. All right. All right. I'm gonna, oh gosh. All right. Nothing like going into your sexual past at 10 a.m. on a Friday morning. Um,
Yes.
well, Dr. Juliana, thank you so, so much. I'm going to email you and get another date on the calendar, because I really think this is an area that we don't talk about enough, is the good men thing, and just men in general with raising boys and the whole sexuality thing. Like, it's a whole thing.
It, it is, and I have a boy
Yeah.
too, so I can talk professionally and
Okay.
personally from that experience.
All
I'm so
right.
glad. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. Appreciate you.
So good. So much to think about, so much I'm still thinking about. I felt like everything she said was a quote, it was a note to be made, and if this conversation was a chapter in a book, I would have highlighted the entire darn thing. Where to even start? I think the thing that really is sticking with me is really having to take a look at that idea around just going with it, especially when it comes to sexuality and youth. And I'm hoping some of you out there can relate. I know if we went to any level of schooling together and you're hearing this, I know there are some of you out there raising a hand, because I was in the cafeteria every weekend morning watching table after table of mostly girls chatting away about the night before. It's definitely a gray area that I don't think gets talked about enough. We talk a lot about true trauma, especially when it comes to sexuality, and obviously that needs to be spoken about. It needs to be shouted from the rooftops, and resources and support all need to be there. And then there's also that, say it again, that gray area of, no, I don't think I was assaulted. It wasn't necessarily traumatic, but something feels off about it, or it felt off about it. And I want to say that deep diving into your sexual past isn't easy or necessarily fun, especially if there is significant trauma there. But I was actually so pleasantly surprised to hear myself converse with Dr. Juliana, because I know how I have conversed on this topic on past episodes, and at least inwardly, it was way more comfortable. And that is because I have done a few therapy sessions, kind of going back in time, looking at situations and relationships from my past that I didn't even realize were kind of still lingering in my subconscious. I have a little bit of a cold, which is why I'm having trouble pronouncing my words. But the body doesn't forget, the subconscious doesn't forget, and it was through conversations on this show, for example, with Dr. Lis, Dr. Donahue, Dr. Overstreet, where we really were talking about sexuality, and I noticed how uncomfortable I was with it. And so I did. I went back to my therapist and was like, we gotta look at this. And it wasn't like this big thing that we did. There was, but there were a few sessions where just saying some of the really embarrassing, confusing, at the time shameful, and truthfully just really hurtful things that happened in relationships that I no longer care or think about, but just venting about them again, and venting about them having adult perspective, there was something about it that was really healing. So anyway, I encourage you to go over and follow along on Dr. Juliana's social media, get on her newsletter, and start exploring your past a little bit. It will help you do as she says, discover the essence of you. What do people say? It's like we have to unpack where we came from in order to know where we're going. People say things like that. I know they do. I don't know exactly how they say them, but you get what I'm saying. So anyway, thank you so much, Dr. Juliana. You are going places, lady. Thank you for listening, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. Sass Says is a production of Luann Garrett Inc. This podcast is meant to be educational and not meant to replace professional therapy or professional medical attention. To learn more about today's show and what's new in my world, head over to sasssays.com. Thanks so much. Talk later.